And this one is about Chris Hedges. Now, you guys know, I've told you guys before that I think you need to follow his Substack. It's really good. And I don't have time to like read everyone's Substack. It sucks because there's a lot of good content out there. But I always make an effort to read his because I feel like I learn something from it every time. Now, this story actually is going to make a connection to the Glenn Greenwald story. And I think just so happened that way. I didn't plan it that way. It just so happened that way. But in this recent article here, Chris Hedges is talking about Ukraine and the politics of permanent war. What he does in this article, he makes the connection between war and censorship. And I think after you hear this, I'm not going to read the entire article because that kind of defeats the purpose of you going and reading the article. But there are certain parts here that I do want to touch on. And I do want to say that after you hear this tonight, it may show you something in reference to censorship where it's more of a larger picture here than you realize. After you hear this and after you see the clip from Glenn Greenwald, we're going to combine this all together. And I swear, I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. So this article, Ukraine and the Politics of Permanent War. Let's go ahead and get into it. This is by Chris Hedges from the Chris Hedges Report on Substack. Eric, feel free to put the link in the chat to this. Permanent war requires permanent censorship. Remember that, because we're going to come back to that. So here we go. No one, including the most bullish supporters of Ukraine, expect the nation's war with Russia to end soon. The fighting has been reduced to artillery duels across hundreds of miles of front lines and creeping advances and retreats. Ukraine, like Afghanistan, will bleed for a very long time. This is by design. Now, I do want to chime in here. It kind of reminds me of an interview that Julian Assange had where he said the goal is not actually to win. The goal is to have a never-ending war. And that's the way this conflict appears to be heading from what I've seen so far. Let's go back in. On August 24th, the Biden administration announced yet another massive military aid package to Ukraine worth nearly $3 billion. It will take months, and in some cases, years, for this military equipment to reach Ukraine. And another sign that Washington assumes the conflict will be a long war of attrition. It will give a name to the U.S. military assistance mission in Ukraine and make it a separate command overseen by 2- or 3-star general. Since August 2021, this is important, Biden has approved more than $8 billion in weapons transfers from existing stockpiles, known as drawdowns, to be shipped to Ukraine, which do not require congressional approval. Remember this. Remember, it goes further than the $40 billion package that Congress approved, that they voted on to send to Ukraine. So that's important to note, including humanitarian assistance, replenishing depleting U.S. weapon stocks, expanding U.S. troop presence in Europe. Congress has approved over $53.6 billion. So it's a lot, you guys. Our approved assistance to Ukraine is more than twice these amounts. So that's going into numbers here for the Center for Disease Control. And he's saying just how much we have contributed to them. Now let's go ahead and get to the part here about the media. The mass media cravenly decimates these binary absurdities in 24-hour news cycles. It's news celebrities and experts, universally drawn from the intelligence community and military, rarely deviate from the approved script. Day and night, the drums of war never stop beating. Its goal to keep billions of dollars flowing into the hands of the war industry and prevent the public from asking inconvenient questions. This is the role where mainstream media comes in, right? Because I remember, and I don't know if everyone is old enough to remember this, but I remember when the war in Iraq started, and it was very difficult to find a narrative that went against mainstream media at that point. There was no Facebook at that time. I'm trying to remember correctly. I don't think Facebook was around at that point. There was, no TikTok or all of these other social media platforms that we use, right? And I didn't know many independent media journalists at that time. It was very easy to believe what we were told. Now, yes, years later, they did admit that, look, we were sold a lie. But at that time, when it was happening, I look back sometimes and I wondered, like, why did I not even question it? And then I have to remember what I was being told. I couldn't find one mainstream media outlet that wasn't advocating for it. And again, I didn't know much about independent media back then. So it was really easy to believe as a part of the American public that we were doing the right thing. And it wasn't until I got older and I started doing my own research and I realized, I don't think we were doing the right thing. Same thing with Afghanistan. We weren't doing the right thing. But the reason why that narrative exists, the reason why it's in place is because there's a lot of money to be made off of these wars, this war industry. And so the mainstream media has the same talking points as the United States government. This is true to a T, by the way. If you look at what the US government says and you look at what mainstream media says, it's pretty much the same. That's on purpose. So let's go back in. Oh, thank you for that, Graham. 2004 Facebook. Okay, thanks. Okay, so he goes on to say, in the face of this barrage, no dissent is permitted. None. CBS News caved to pressure and retracted its documentary, which charged that only 30% of arms shipped to Ukraine were making it to the front lines, which the rest siphoned off to the black market. A finding that was separately reported upon by U.S. journalist Lindsay Snell. CNN has acknowledged there is no oversight of weapons once they arrive in Ukraine, long considered the most corrupt country in Europe. According to a poll of executives responsible for tackling fraud completed by Ernst & Young in 2018, Ukraine was ranked the 9th most corrupt nation from 53 surveyed. Now, why did they have to change their story? Why did they have to hide certain information? Because that's not what the government wants you to know. If you know that, if more people know that, then more people would be livid, I would think, at the fact that we've given them so much money and we're still giving them money. They don't want you to know that, so we got to pull that back. No, let's cut that story. This is how they control the narrative. Let's go in. War, we're going to go to this paragraph here. War is the primary business of the U.S. empire and the bedrock of the U.S. economy. The two ruling political parties slavishly perpetuate permanent war, as they do austerity programs, trade deals, the virtual tax boycott for corporations and the rich, wholesale government surveillance, the militarization of the police, and the maintenance of the largest prison system in the world. They bow before the dictates of the militarist who have created a state within a state. This militarism, as Seymour writes in The Permanent War Economy, American Capitalism in Decline, is fundamentally contradictory to the formation of a new political economy based upon democracy, instead of hierarchy in the workplace and the rest of society. The idea that war economy brings prosperity has become more than an American illusion. This comes from Melman. When converted, as it has been, into ideology that justifies the militarization of society and moral debasement, as in Vietnam, then critical reassessment of that illusion is a matter of urgency. It is a primary responsibility of thoughtful people who are committed to humane values to confront and respond to the prospect that deterioration of American economy and society, owing to the ravages of the war economy, can become irreversible. If permanent war is to be halted, the ideological control of that war industry must be shattered. The war industry's funding of politicians, research centers, and think tanks, as well as its domination of media monopolies, must end. They control all of it. All of the outlets are controlled. Why do you guys think they're trying to smear, some of these anti-war voices so much? Why do you think they're coming after them? They don't want people to hear that side of it. They only want people to hear the narrative that they want them to hear, so that they can continue to think, and this is really strong in America, this whole idea of, yay, rah, rah, America, we're the best, America first. They want people to still have that mindset, to still have that mentality, so that they won't ask questions to the US government and ask them, why are you still giving them all of this money, but you're not giving anything to the American people? Why is the military industrial complex, why is the budget so bloated and that so little was given to the American people? Because if you know the whole story, if everyone knew the whole story, then more people would ask questions. Then more people would push back. And here's another little trick. As long as they keep you divided over left versus right, instead of actually pushing back on the core issue, we will constantly push back against the president that's in office that's not on our team. And that's the problem. Some of the people right now that are speaking out against this whole conflict in Ukraine is not so much because they don't agree with the conflict and the spending. It's more so because they don't agree with it because Biden's doing it and he's not on their team. But what if we got rid of the labels? What if we got rid of the left versus right and we just had people just focus on the issues at hand? That's what they don't want us to do. They don't want people to just look at the issues. They want people to belong to their party, their political party, and do what the party tells them to do. And this is the problem. There's a lot of money to be made in war. A lot. So I go on to say here, I'm going to scoot down to this portion here about critics. Critics already shout out from corporate media. They're relentlessly attacked, discredited, and silenced for speaking a truth that threatens the public's quiescence. I hope I said that correctly. Quiescence, while the U.S. Treasury is pillaged by the war industry and the nation disemboweled. Look at this, guys. You see the problem? The U.S. Treasury is pillaged by the war industry and the nation is disemboweled. This is what they do. Now, there are two links here where he does talk to Matt Taibbi about this as well. Those are previous videos, so you can check that out as well. And then there's this portion here I wanted to talk about as well. The war industry, defied by the mass media, including the entertainment industry, is never held accountable for the military fiascos, cost overruns, dud weapon systems, and proliferate waste. No matter how many disasters from Vietnam to Afghanistan it orchestrates, it is showered with larger and larger amounts of federal funds, nearly half of all the government's discretionary spending. The monopolization of capital by the military has driven the U.S. debt to over 30 trillion, 6 trillion more than the U.S. GDP of 24 trillion. Servicing this debt costs 300 billion a year. We're spending more on the military, 813 billion for fiscal year 2023, than the next 9 countries, including China and Russia combined. And there's one more piece I want to add here as well about the military industrial complex and when it comes to climate change. For those of you who are really passionate about climate change, you do know that no amount of recycling that you do, no matter how many of us buy electric vehicles, none of that is going to undo or is going to be greater enough to take out the damage that is done by the military industrial complex when it comes to the environment. That is the most powerful source. And so if you really want to tackle climate change, you have to tackle the MIC. And climate scientists know that. And I'm pretty sure a lot of our politicians know that, but they're not going to tell the American people that because they like to make money off of the military and war. One more portion here that I do want to highlight as well. He goes on to talk about NewsGuard. Let me just go down here. This piece here about the censorship. Yes, this piece here about the censorship. This is another thing that they've been doing to journalists as well. Let's go into the YouTube effect. Negative ratings will drive away advertisers, which is the intent. It is also a very short step from blacklisting these sites to censoring them, as happened when YouTube erased 6 years of my show on Contact that was broadcast on RT America and RT International. Not one show was about Russia. This is true. I think you can actually still catch some of those episodes. There's someone on YouTube. They have a channel called Hedges Fan. I think it's Chris Hedges Fan. And they actually have like a lot of his clips. So I'm assuming they did that on their own, but you can catch some of those if you want to go back and see. Now, it goes on to say, not one show was about Russia and not one violated the guidelines for contempt imposed by YouTube, but many did examine the evils of U.S. militarism. Now, it goes on to say here, they talk about Consortium News. PayPal's cancellation of Consortium News account is an evident attempt to defund it for what it's almost certainly the company's view that Consortium News violated its restrictions on providing false or misleading information. It cannot be known with 100% certainty because PayPal is hiding behind its reasons. But Consortium News trades in information and nothing else. So that was another one that was targeted as well, right? So I say all of this, and I want to go ahead and go back up to the very top of this article. Again, feel free to read the entire article. There were a couple of things I pointed out, but read the entire article. Permanent war requires permanent censorship. As long as we have these never-ending wars, we will always have censorship. Chris Hedges pointed out something that I didn't really think about before. As long as we have those never-ending wars, again, the goal is not necessarily to win. We'll always have censorship. Desert Mantis says makes perfect sense. Yeah, I mean, I never thought about it that way, but he has a point. Swift BMF. I was 23 when they went into Iraq, and I was on the Iraq War March in London, and even a million of us couldn't make a dent in the propaganda. Yeah, so Swift BMF, you remember. Mm-hmm. You know, there were some people who did speak out against it, and they were quickly removed from media. And one of them was Phil Donahue. My mom used to watch him. He had a talk show. He was against the war in Iraq. And just like that, Phil was gone.